Film cellist journalism is operator is available infrastructure. The evolving tower.
Hello and welcome everyone to our session on enhancing the security of DFS applications in emerging economies. I'm LJ Rich, your moderator for this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The Financial Inclusion Global Initiative, or FIGI, is a partnership between the World Bank Group, the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructure of the Bank for International Settlements, and the International Telecommunication Union, that's the ITU, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to support and accelerate the implementation of country-led reform actions to meet national financial inclusion targets and ultimately the global universal financial access goal. FIGI funds national implementations in 3 countries, China, Egypt and Mexico, supports working groups to tackle 3 sets of outstanding challenges for reaching universal financial access: 1, electronic payment acceptance; 2, digital ID for financial services; and 3, security, infrastructure and trust, and hosts the symposia. This is the 3rd and final edition of the FIGI Symposium. The FIGI Symposium provides a forum for dialogue amongst telecom and financial sector authorities, financial service providers, digital financial services, DFS providers, and related stakeholders to share experiences and perspectives on scaling up DFS. The session today on enhancing the security of DFS applications in emerging economies will explore the vulnerabilities that can impact the security of these applications operating on basic and feature phones. Some of the vulnerabilities that will be examined in this session include man-in-the-middle attacks, SS7 vulnerabilities, social engineering, replaying of sessions, including those that can impact the SIM card as well. We'll also discuss some of the measures that have been implemented by DFS regulators and mobile network operators to mitigate the impact of these threats, and also consider the rise of phishing attacks on digital finance during the pandemic. Today's panelists are Simeon Coney, Chief Strategy Officer, Adaptive Mobile Security, Eve Araduha, Senior Manager, IT Clients and Delivery, MTN Uganda, and Arnold Chibuka, Project Officer, Standardization Bureau, ITU. And we're going to give each panelist the opportunity to make some introductory remarks before beginning the discussion segment of our event. So first up, I would like to introduce Simeon Coney.
Thanks very much, LJ. So today, what I would like to do is spend a little bit of time talking about some of the current and high-risk attacks that we see really targeting financial services. So at Adaptive Mobile, what we do is deliver protection for mobile operators around the world and aggregators. Today, we're protecting almost 1 in 4 mobile users, 2.2 billion people. So what I'm going to be sharing today is really looking at the attacks that we are currently seeing and giving you some insight on why these are being conducted and what people can do to help keep themselves safe. So starting with it, really, I mean, looking at our lives, I bet absolutely everyone here has either a phone in their hand, a phone in their pocket, or a phone within reach right now. I mean, we are living our digital lives on phones. And what we're seeing is financial institutions are amongst many different industries who are really leveraging that connectivity that our phones give us. There are so many advantages. Gives us greater convenience, better access to services, more awareness of our financial position, enhanced security, better education of our financial position. So huge amount of upsides, and we can see why they've been so well adopted. And a lot of financial institutions have made a lot of investment in their own services and infrastructure. So where interactions occur under their networks and under their controls, there's a good level of protection. However, when we start considering the mobile device, a lot of that infrastructure is actually external to the financial institutions. So we have the challenge first off of trying to deliver a protection of a service right to the end, i.e. right to the handset, as well as the way we use our phones, because we're all guilty that if our phone pings with an alert, our first response is pick it up, read it, and try and action it. So mobile devices are such a tempting target for attackers. Almost everyone has a mobile device now, and they hold so much sensitive information. Really 3 broad areas that we're seeing attacks leveraging. So firstly, stealing credentials. Many of us do now do our banking on the phone, or hold our card details, or probably even hold our PIN numbers and sensitive personal information like passwords on that device. So stealing credentials is a real key focus for attackers, whether that's by social engineering mechanisms, in other words, trying to impersonate someone, spoofing, phishing attacks, trying to pretend that they're an organization, or even redirecting people so they think they're talking to one organization, whereas instead they're engaging with the attackers. There's also stealing of information. So in addition to credentials, sometimes just other contextual information can be very valuable, like, for example, where someone might be, or being able to hijack services associated with them. And lastly, we're seeing that actually a new wave of attacks are actually recruiting unwitting devices or people into the attacks themselves. So mobile malware, particularly over the last 9 months, has been undergoing a real resurgence here. And we'll be looking at some of those attacks today as well. So let's start by looking at some of the social engineering attacks and the profile of these aimed at banks. So the first thing is, a mobile telephone number is actually quite different to email. If you've got somebody's Gmail address or Apple address, you really do not know where they are, even what country they're in. Whereas a mobile phone number will always at least tell you what country it was registered in just by looking at the start of the number. And attackers can use this and they can use some quite sophisticated signaling attacks to actually interrogate networks to get even more information about where someone is. And it's this type of intelligence they can use to make something that is fraudulent look really quite credible. Like, hey, I see you're in location X. You've just tried to do a transaction. We will help you with delivering more value or more security, whereas they're actually trying to steal information. We also see attackers time when they're doing these attacks to coincide with maybe times like public holidays or when financial institutions' helplines are actually closed, so people can't call up to double check. And we're also seeing, again, a lot of these attacks exploiting users' partial awareness that they need to be more secure by actually pretending to be part of the security cycle themselves. So a very common social engineering attack is calling or sending a message pretending to actually be the bank and saying that there has been a suspicious transaction. And what they're doing is just calling to confirm that everything is secure and safe. And the process of that, again, they're stealing personal information. So not only do we have these type of social engineering attacks, but we also see attackers exploit the way that mobile devices themselves work. So if you pick up your phone and you look at your message inbox, what you'll see is that messages from the same sender appear in conversation threads. And attackers can exploit this by sending a message to victims that looks like it comes from the same identity as their bank. Now, the nasty thing about this is the user has probably got a set of messages there that they know are actually from their financial institution. So when the attacker's message arrives, it comes into that same conversational thread. That gives it legitimacy. And that means people are more likely to fall prey to it and to respond. And we then see this being combined with techniques like prompting for just a couple of digits from somebody's PIN code, but pretending they got it wrong, asking for a few more digits, and eventually asking for a few more. And before you realize it, they've got the entire PIN number. But it's not just our traditional bricks and mortar banking that we're seeing prey to these. We're also seeing attackers target things like cryptocurrencies. Not only the increase in value of cryptocurrencies, but the fact that people are accessing many of their Bitcoin wallets and other secure wallets on their mobile devices means, again, there is an opportunity to help exploit that relationship between the device and the service by the attackers. So again, things like social engineering scams, pretending to help protect people's online account against unauthorized access. And we're seeing all of the major cryptocurrencies being targeted again with this impersonation, with this phishing type attacks that we see occur against the major financial institutions. So we've been exploring here some of the social engineering attacks using messaging, SMS, even MMS and RCS. In addition, there's a third type of attack that we see targeting financial institutions, and that's exploiting some of the underlying signaling networks that really hook all mobile networks together. So the way networks work is that they're all interconnected because, of course, if you roam from one country to another, or if you want to call someone on another network, you have to have those two networks connected. And it's this interconnection on top of different telco-specific protocols that attackers are able to compromise. And the compromises are actually quite severe. They can do automatic interception of messages. So if a bank is sending you a two-factor authentication message or a mobile transaction identifier, it is possible for attackers, if the network is not protected, to intercept and obtain a copy of that message themselves. We've also seen attackers use things like temporary call forwarding. So again, for the banks who think they're actually trying to be extra secure by calling an end user, the attackers are able to redirect that call to their own number under their control and obtain that information and use that again to hijack the account. So what we see is these secondary authentication processes that financial institutions are putting into place to help try and make things more secure are actually sometimes being turned against them as a result of these technical attacks being conducted against the mobile network, not the financial institution network itself. And the reason that mobile networks are actually vulnerable is that they're predominantly using protocols that were designed decades ago. Fundamentally, everyone was assumed to be trusted. It was mostly governments setting up networks, and therefore these were large organizations who could be well trusted. However, nowadays, there are thousands of networks, and those connections to those networks are also resold to third parties. And so once access is gained into this network, it then means attackers have access to all of those same types of controls that the operators have in terms of handing calls backwards and forwards or roaming where a subscriber is. And it's this lack of validation across the levels in the networks that attackers are exploiting. Very complicated techniques and impossible to defend against if you're a user. It doesn't matter whether you're on the latest, greatest smartphone, whether it's Android, whether it be Apple, or whether it be a simple feature phone. This is the signaling protocol used to connect your device to the network and the way the networks talk to each other. And as we progress with the latest standards, moving 4G to even 5G, we find a lot of the new standards are actually based on the same principles. So again, there are still sometimes fundamental weaknesses in the overall architecture and the design of this. And it's not just the messaging nor the signaling that's also leading rise to mobile attacks. We're seeing mobile malware increasingly over the last 9-12 months play a major role in this. There's a particular nasty variant right now called FluBot. And this one virus is used to steal passwords. It's used to steal any information of interest that might be on a handset, like credit card numbers, bank usernames, bank passwords. And also, once the virus is on the handset, it then uses that infected handset to send out other copies of the message that infects users to many other people. So it actually is recruiting these unwitting victims in as part of its overall attack network, which makes it very hard to actually spot who is behind all of this. And again, this is why delivering protection at a network level is absolutely critical, because this is able to spot all this unusual behavior and all the mutation to deliver consistent, effective defense. So to improve security, there are a number of things that we can all do. Firstly, the mobile networks can deliver protection for these types of attacks that are within their domains. So two areas here, messaging firewalls. This is delivering protection against any type of spam or scams or phishing, or in fact, actually any distribution of malware that is either coming into their network or going out from their network. And we're seeing these starting to be adopted across the globe. And we also are seeing signaling firewalls being heavily adopted. And this is delivering protection against that type of interception attack I was talking about earlier. So whether that be location interrogation, finding out actually not only which city, but potentially which cell a user is connected to, or intercepting calls or messages, or even redirecting those. Signaling firewalls prevent that type of attack. And for us as users, there are a number of things that we can do as well. Firstly, if we ever receive anything that we think to be suspicious, don't respond, don't reply, don't click, don't even answer if you don't recognize or you think that number is suspicious. And if you have answered a phone call and you're getting suspicious, if in doubt, hang up. You can always call back any institution on a number that you've gained by looking on a number source that you trust, like their website or in your own contact book. And if possible, actually try calling from an alternative device, because we've seen scams where people pretend to hang up, play a dial tone, and then pretend to be the bank when people have called back in. And lastly, anyone who calls, no matter how legitimate, you have a right to challenge who they are. Just because the number looks like a number you trust, you always have the right to ask them to be able to identify themselves with a piece of information that only they should have. So there are a range of techniques and a range of defenses, and we're proving very successful in delivering defense against these attacks, all working together or delivering protection so we can actually support the new wave of financial services. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Simi and Coney. A fantastic and somewhat discomforting roundup of the different ways malware can be placed on our mobile devices. Thankfully, you've also supplied us with a few ways for users to handle these sorts of attacks. So thank you very much, Simeon. And it's on to our second panelist, who is going to be Eve Araduha. Ready?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you,
I'll
LJ.
leave you to it. Thank you.
Yeah. From MTN, I'll discuss mainly the MTN security best practices for digital financial services. Next slide. So as you can see there, it's a journey for MTN as we're building the digital operator. So by building a digital operator, it means that we want to operate at the intersection of the three complementary industry trends, and that's the evolving telco, the digital player, and the fintech player. As an evolving telco, means the business is transforming from what was originally voice and to now mobile internet, and also to become a scalable player to compete in the enterprise and wholesale services. And then as a fintech player, we want to use the existing infrastructure that was originally meant for voice to access mobile financial services. And some of the services in that space, we're looking at the transfers, the payments, loans, deposits, insurance, and marketplace. And then as a digital player, we want to take advantage of the rapidly growing internet infrastructure to ensure we can offer digital services like messaging, mobile advertising, instant messaging, video, and music. So as you can see, in all this, as we're trying to move towards building a digital operator, it means MTN can easily access 6 distinct pools of revenue. You're looking at voice, data, digital, wholesale, enterprise, and fintech. And with all this, we're using one network, which was originally meant for consumer voice and now has been repurposed for data. We're still using a single distribution network that was initially established for formal agent network and now has been repurposed for agency banking, and a single registration that was initially for SIM registration, and we can quickly activate the SIM cards for digital financial services. So with our telco, or telco in general, moving to being digital operators, that means security has to be paramount. Looking at Uganda specifically, it's both a GSM and a DFS provider. Mobile money in Uganda, or DFS services, was launched in 2009 and has steadily grown towards a significant revenue contributor. Right now, it actually does almost 20% of our top line revenue. And then we have over 8 million active DFS wallets, 30 days active. Then the transaction value is over $3 million US, and that's over a month. And then the transaction volumes are over 300 million, which is about 10 million transactions a day. And some of the services on the DFS platform are P2P, where I can send mobile money from my number to another number. We have remittances, where subscribers in the diaspora send money to the local people with ease. We have retail payments. We have savings and loans. We have collections, third-party integrations, and bank integrations. So as you can see, for us, DFS is quite a big thing. So we really have to ensure that security is paramount. The service has to be secure and available for our customers. Next slide, please. They're really globally, as an MTN group, like I said, for us, fintech solutions and digital are our growth platforms, at least for the next 5 years. In terms of the digital revenue, as you can see, we've grown plus 24%, which is very significant. And now with COVID in play, we need to take advantage of the short window of opportunity to win the digital services space, as most customers are coming online now. And then for fintech, we grew by 18%. Fintech here, we're looking at out of the 23 operations, there are 15 that have digital financial services. So the digital financial users grew by 3.6 million. So to date, we have 38.3 million active users. And then in terms of the activity, which is the transaction value, you're looking at 61.2 billion US dollars and 11,700 transactions per minute. In terms of some of the products, we have 8.6 million registered insurance policies on the platform. And maybe just to highlight, during COVID, we had to zero rate, this revenue could have been more, but we had to zero rate and reduce on the transaction fees to support our customers as they were getting used to the platform during COVID-19. Next slide, please. So with the platform with that magnitude, we really need to enforce and be aware of what security threats available. So it's just high level in terms of what I'm going to discuss in the next slides. It's really about the enhancing security of the DFS applications in emerging economies. So I'll briefly talk about the security controls on USSD to safeguard our customers, and I'll discuss the threats and mitigations here that we've been able to put in place. And then as a telco, we really rely on third-party partners to grow the mobile money ecosystem because they handle high value volumes of transactions on our behalf, and this exposes us to significant counterpart and reputational regulatory risks. So we'll discuss some integration threats there and some medications that we have in place. Then also as part of the COVID-19, there were some security threats we've experienced as an operation and some lessons learned thereof because of the new normal of having to work from home and learning from home. So we had to do some rollouts of virtual private networks for all staff. So we had to be emphatic on security there. And then lastly, I'll discuss the QR codes in mobile money and the related security issues. QR code really because of COVID, it's one of those that is preferred because it's a contactless form of payment, and going forward will be accessed by most markets because of COVID. The next slide. So like we've discussed, with the platform of that magnitude, there will definitely be threats to the digital financial services. And these are some of the common threats that we've experienced. There's social engineering. This is common in Uganda. Here, the tricksters really socialize with you, and then they have some sort of techniques in which they trick a subscriber who will end up providing their mobile money PIN. Then we have the SMS and phishing attacks. This is also common in Uganda. Here, the fraudsters use some sort of emotional delusional SMS to trick customers to reveal their mobile money PINs. And then phishing attacks, on the other hand, the attackers use anonymous phone calls and fake promotions to trick users in disclosing their PINs and sometimes even their personal information, which is used to steal money from their mobile accounts. Then we have denial of service attacks. These usually the attackers are targeting a network link with fake traffic to block requests from mobile money users to access the database. With this kind of attack, it means the mobile money services becomes inaccessible to our customers. And then the other one that we've experienced is manipulation of USSD. Of course, USSD as a communication channel is not encrypted, so it's a bit risky. So it's a bit vulnerable to attacks. Then we'll have the DFS account hijacks, that's your mobile money account hijack and unauthorized SIM swaps. We have experienced man-in-the-middle attacks where the intercepts a message in transit and becomes familiar with our messaging system, and in the process, transmits a fake message to the other party. And lastly, but not very common, are the zero-day attacks. These attacks are normally not known. The attacker exploits a potentially software weakness in a system, that the vendor is normally not aware of, and that's how they can get into the system. So these threats, if exploited, can compromise the digital financial services, resulting into revenue loss, fraud, regulatory scrutiny, and can impact our company damage and reputation. Next slide. So here, these are some of the controls that we have in place, and these have been adopted from what we call a CIA model. It considers information security and ensures protection against confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality is really around allowing access to data for which the user is permitted. Then integrity ensures that data is not altered or tampered with by unauthorized users. And then availability is to ensure that data is available to authorized users when they need it. This for us is really about continuity, because DFS is a critical revenue platform. So specifically, if we go into the controls, we have those that are towards the transport layer. This is the communication channel the customers use towards our application. So they will be either through USSD, SMS, or the mobile money app platforms. So some of the controls that we've implemented in that space is the SS7 firewall. MTN implemented an SS7 firewall, and this provides the capability for us to view all SS7 threats and attacks, and has the capability to address these as they arise. It helps us detect unwanted and malicious messages, and allows us to set firewall policies and enforcing defined rules to ensure legitimate use and prevent malicious intent. Also from that firewall, there are email alerts that are triggered to a certain group that picks all sorts of indicators of compromises and routes them to responsible teams. That's what the firewall does for us. Then as part of the controls, we also have the two-factor authentication for all our apps and portals. This really provides an additional layer of protection in our environment. Then for mobile money, it's really about environment isolation. So this means that this platform is unshared. There's unshared access from all other services. I'm talking about the IPs, the VLANs, the profiles, all that is separate and is isolated. And for you to access, you have to be whitelisted. Then the other thing is the transport layer security, which is normally the TLS. This is enforced amongst all systems. That is internally communicating and externally communicating, which is your mutual TLS, and the cyber management, among others. So in this case, we ensure there's a certificate handshake with both parties, either internally or externally. And they have to ensure that they're on the latest transport layer security version. Then the other control in place is user management improvement and continuous patch management. Here we ensure that there is a password management in place. Access is controlled within the environment. The endpoints, which are laptops or devices, are continuously patched with the latest releases, because once all that is in place, then you're essentially controlling the threats of being attacked. And then specifically on the customers, there have been some know your customer controls that we've put in place in terms of the SIM cards. So SIM swap and PIN reset controls, all these require biometric. There is no question about that. And then we also ensure that there are no SIM swaps that happen on all channels after 8 p.m. And then also on any IMSI change, which is a SIM swap, we suspend your wallet for 24 hours. And then on SIM swaps, we only do one SIM swaps a day for each national ID number. And then strictly from our regulator, all SIM registrations for new ones, SIM swaps and PIN resets, without question, are based on subscriber identity and there has to be biometric. So we are also introducing an OTP because we have cases where you can have multiple registrations on one national ID. So in that particular case, we're also introducing an OTP before that SIM swap happens, so that you're able to authorize it before the SIM swap happens on that particular SIM card. And then most importantly also is a security by design for all our DFS products and implementation. That means we ensure protection against confidentiality, integrity, and availability while we are designing products in the DFS space specifically. Next slide, please. And maybe just to highlight, SIM registration and SIM swaps are a high risk in all our operations. So there's continuous assessment to tighten up the controls, because as we think, even the fraudster is thinking. So that's a continuous process. And then moving on to the third parties, as I had highlighted earlier, these third parties are really a necessary evil. They handle high value and volumes of transactions, and this exposes us to significant risk as an operation. But the risk notwithstanding, they are necessary to support us in the agility and growth of the mobile money ecosystem. So we need to manage and maintain the relationship in a controlled manner. So in order for us to increase the security posture of the third party partner integrations, we have a couple of controls that we've put in place as well. That is setting up site-to-site VPNs. That is, a VPN is a virtual private network. So for application to application, they site-to-site, but generally we've established secure virtual private networks for all of them. We're also ensuring that all our third parties support the transport layer versions, as well as the latest TLS protocols and ciphers. And then also in terms of the mobile money platform being isolated, so all these third parties need to be whitelisted on the perimeter firewall and our platform for them to be able to access. Then we also have standardized API management standards in place to allow for stricter a single channel for them to get into our environment. There's also very rigorous vulnerability assessments that we carry out. Here we monitor regularly any open and unused ports and proactively block them. And then lastly, we're in the process of implementing standards, which include some minimal contractual requirements like insurance. They'll be expected to probably deposit or be liable in terms of cybercrime. Then there is the public liability insurance. So those are some of the things we want to put in place. And then in terms of cybersecurity controls, we're looking at credential management for these third-party partners and access controls, to mention a few. Next slide, please. Here, I'll really discuss the COVID-19 threats that we experienced as an operation and the lessons that we learned thereof. With the work from home, really, there was increased rollout of the virtual private network to support the staff who are working from home, especially if you needed to access the company resources and applications. So security in this case needed to be emphasized. There was not too much on email because this is in the cloud and there's already security in that particular space. So some of the threats that we experienced were phishing attacks. There was malicious domain registrations. These were picked up from the intrusion detection alerts that we monitor daily or every other day. Excuse me. Then in the work from home arrangement, it has limitations to endpoint patching, especially when users are not online, are not on VPN. So there we also had a challenge and was actually a threat to us. And then there was a video and audio conferencing hacks, but in our environment, we were restricted to only Microsoft Teams. So some of the mitigations and lessons we learned was the continued security awareness. We had to ensure that we carry out sensitization among staff. So there were sensitization phishing attacks on the security policies, on the global trends of security, and like the latest trends. So that happens every quarter. Then there's a rigorous remote patching of endpoints. These are really devices. So we have to ensure that these are patched because there are releases every month from the different vendors. So every month this is happening and there's continuous engagement. If in over 30 days or 60 days your device is not patched, there's engagement from our service desk teams to ensure you are online for this to happen. And once it doesn't happen, after over 60 days, we delete you off the network. And so you're prompted to come to the office to ensure that the patching is done. Because once this is supposed to be done to minimize threats. Then we have the identity and access management. This is really about password baselines, the thresholds, the active session timeouts, if they're in active sessions and how much they should be. We delete dormant accounts periodically. We also continuously monitor leavers and joiners within our environment. And then the other thing that we've implemented is a zero network architecture or implementation. With this particular concept, it assumes that all actors, systems, or services operating within a certain zone are by no chance trusted. So that means at any point, we must verify everything and anything trying to connect to our systems. So, and all this we've been able to do to provide a secure working environment or workplace for the staff. Next slide, please. So lastly, we'll discuss the QR codes in mobile money security and their related security issues. As I highlighted earlier, QR codes now with COVID offer contactless payment alternatives. So most people are actually going for these. A QR code is a type of barcode with encoded information. And this QR code payments is a potential opportunity for us to expand our products and services to target potential incremental revenue streams. However, these codes have inherent threats because they're not easily readable by the human eye. Attackers can easily replace a merchant QR code with an evil code that could be embedded with malicious content. Specifically in the MTN environment, QR code is still in infant stages, but we have so far 2 products where we are applying them. One is under our merchant payments. So now merchants do accept payments from customers for goods and services by scanning a QR code into a payment application. For now, we're still doing static QR codes, but eventually we'll evolve to the dynamic codes. And then there's also under our Open API, we have a collection widget where still these merchants can receive and approve mobile money payments on their website by scanning a QR code. This is still in testing. We haven't used it, but we should roll out probably by end of this year, this particular functionality. So some of the issues around QR codes is if your phone is lost or stolen, of course, that means there will be unauthorized use, and of your smartphone. So it means with the QR code payment app, I mean, there will be, so that code will be used in a way that is unauthorized and can affect the privacy of your product or your service. Then scanning a QR code can be tagged to a malware site and application. This is another common one where you can scan a QR code that is tagged to malware and malware sites and application. And then there's also a case of fake QR codes. Here, the attacker replaces the QR code, and the fake code leads them leads the user to basically malicious internet content. Yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eve, for giving us an insight into MTN's journey. Fake QR codes and fast responses to the new normal. It's great to hear what's been implemented for supporting increased working from home during the COVID-19 pandemic. This is actually my office I've been shielding for the vast majority of the time, and I've relied upon a fast internet connection. So thank you very much for all the responses that go into place for keeping us as safe as possible. Okay, we have our final panelist now, so please join me in welcoming Arnold Chibuka.
All right, thank you,
Hi.
LJ. I'll try
Ready
and.
to go?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Okay,
Okay,
see you in
that's
a bit.
great. Yeah, let me try to put up my slides then. Okay, I hope I'm sharing the right slide or the right screen. So hello, everyone. My name is Arnold Chibuka. I'm the project officer at the ITU, and I'm privileged today to share with you about the USSD testing and STK testing that we're doing here at the ITU's Digital Financial Services Security Lab. And sorry, my slides are not moving. Okay. So as an overview, today I'm going to talk about, sorry, just give me 1 second. Yeah. So as an overview, I'm going to talk about the security risks to USSD and STK applications, and then give examples of these attacks. And then I'll share with you some of the USSD and STK security tests that we're doing at the ITU, and then share some of the recommendation measures and mitigation measures that we do have that have come out of the different working groups that we have here at the out of FIGI. Next slide. So I've tried to break down the risks depending on where they are in that ecosystem. And most of these have been discussed by the previous speakers. I think Smion and Eve have ably talked about social engineering, and Eve has also gone deep dive into the SIM swap, and then a little bit about the device malware. So most of them have been discussed, and SS7 vulnerability. So what I'm going to do is just speak about what we're doing in the lab and how we're testing them. Though my next slide will give some examples about some of these attacks, whether they've been happening. And what we've seen in the past is that they are very good examples of these attacks. And as you can see, they're not just happening in the emerging economies, but in the world over. And I think Simeon also mentioned this. As you can see in one of the pictures, in February 2021, the National Crime Agency reported sports stars, musicians, and their families had been targeted, and they lost money, and this happened because of a SIM swap. And then sometime in March 2021, in a small village called Kasarani, that's in the neighborhood of Nairobi, the DCI, which is the Directorate for Criminal Investigation, also arrested 6 suspects who were involved in a SIM swap syndicate, and these were using also SIM swap as a way to actually get money out of M-Pesa accounts and bank accounts. And then also in the past, I think in emerging economies, what has become common is the linking of your mobile number to your bank account. And there have been several frauds that have been related to this, as now fraudsters are able to make use of your mobile number or through that channel to actually access your bank. So they are threats that are related to this. And then I think last year in Uganda, there was also a reported loss by the press of about $3 million. And this loss was reported to have been through some 2,000 SIM cards. And we've gone on to note that, several countries in the world are actually warning that because of fraudsters, some SMEs are actually trying to stay a little bit away or being discouraged from joining digital financial services because of these activities. And what's important for me to mention is that there are many other frauds that happen and go unreported. Why? Because most of the people who are using mobile money services are transacting small monies, let's say between the range of, let's say, $20 to $300. So these are not newsworthy, so they may not be reported, but they are people who are being affected on an individual basis. So the question is, what happens? How does this impact consumers? How do these attacks impact consumers. First and most obvious is, of course, loss of funds. Obviously, if most attackers will actually target you to steal your money, so you definitely lose your money, and this affects you personally. The next is service disruption, which actually happens in two forms. One, it could be you as a user. For instance, if a SIM swap happens on your SIM, then you won't be able to access digital financial services. Why? Because you don't have access to the SIM. Or if a SIM clone happens, then you won't be able to actually access your device. You won't be able to access the mobile network, and later on even be able to access mobile financial services. And then the other bit is loss of consumer trust. It so happens that, after losing funds several times or having the mobile financial services network off several times, then consumers start to wonder what the use of using digital financial services is, to the extent that you find that in some economies, people, when they do receive money, especially those that are disadvantaged, not well educated, when they do receive the money, they actually rush off to the agent, withdraw that money and put it at the back of their pocket. And when it's time to transact again, they'll go and deposit it again and try and, and make that transaction that they want to make, but they don't really trust their money to be on that digital platform, and that actually defeats the purpose of what we're trying to push of digital services. So that's why it is important to actually have these threats mitigated. And with that, what the IT is doing is actually collaborating with regulators, telecom providers, to try and mitigate some of these challenges that we're having. So we have 6 main objectives, and one is to collaborate with regulators and DFS providers on security. And then the second is actually perform security audits on DFS applications. And I'll speak a little bit more of this in the next slides. And then the other is to encourage the adoption of international standards on DFS security. So there are some, groups that have gotten together and written documents about security. So we are trying to encourage regulators and DFS providers to actually adopt some of these international standards. And then we also have, we organize some security clinics to disseminate some of the findings of the security infrastructure and trust working group that have come out of the Financial Inclusion Global Initiative. So this project has been running for 3 years, and experts have been sitting together to bring together their thoughts on security. And we do have some of these outputs that we can disseminate through security clinics. And then the other is to assist regulators to evaluate cyber preparedness. This is to say that how ready is a country or a DFS regulator in case of any cyber attack. And then, of course, last but not least is knowledge sharing. And this is to say that if an attack happens in one country X, then we can share that knowledge and say, oh, this happened here, so that it doesn't happen elsewhere. For instance, if something has happened in, for instance, let's say Uganda, then that knowledge can be shared with Kenya to make sure that the attack doesn't happen again in those other regions. And we have 3 main components in the lab for the security audit, for security auditing, and we also have some resources for strong authentication. So really, the first one, which is the developer resources for strong authentication, actually speaks to mechanisms of getting rid of the password. In the past, what we've noted is that most of the frauds are happening because passwords can be harvested and things like that. So the FIDO protocol actually identifies, is actually one of those secure protocols that actually encourages the use of passwordless authentication, if I may use that word. So with these resources, what we do provide is one, some code for developers that they can use to actually integrate FIDO into their native application. And then 2, we do have a demonstration app, and this demo app is for, let's say, the developers, regulators, or telecom providers to actually, or mobile financial services providers to actually download this application, try it on their own, and then see how actually passwordless authentication works. And then the third bit that we do have is for developer resources is for on authentication. We do have a FIDO compliance server here, the ITU. So once the developers have actually developed something, passwordless authentication for their native applications using FIDO, then they can actually use our ITU server as part of their development process. This is mainly just to bootstrap them into using passwordless authentication, so we can move towards a journey of getting rid of passwords which can be harvested. The second bit is we do security audit or assessments, if you like, on Android applications. And this is based on the Open Web Application Security Project, Mobile 10 Risks. And my colleague Vijay on the 24th of June will do a deep dive on some of the security audits that we do for DFS applications. So please look out for that. Then the third, which I'm going to be speaking about mainly, is the security tests or audits for USSD and SDK-based DFS applications. And why do we do this is to make sure that, if you're a regulator or a telecom provider, then you are aware of the risks that your USSD or SDK DFS application has. So there are four main tests that we do in the lab. And one is SIM-swap and SIM-clone. And Eve has already talked about what a SIM-swap is, and I'll just go a little bit into detail to tell you about how we do the test for SIM-swap. And then we do test susceptibility to binary over-the-air attacks. I'll also explain a little bit of that in detail later. And then we also demonstrate that it is possible for somebody to do a remote USSD on your device, even without having access to the device, as long as it's connected to the internet. And then the other bit that we do is a man-in-the-middle attack, where we try and simulate that it is possible for somebody to actually change or manipulate a DFS transaction if they have access to the interface between the SIM card and your mobile device. So I'll start off with the SIM swap. Of course, for those who may not know, a SIM swap normally happens to help you maybe replace your number. For instance, if you've lost your SIM card, then you definitely go to the mobile operator and tell them, hey, I lost my SIM card, please issue me with a new SIM card. And you may be required to do certain things, like for instance, like Eve said, they use the biometrics or whatever, and then they'll issue you a new SIM card. The problem with that is that attackers may also abuse this to hijack your phone number. So in the lab, how do we test that, let's say for digital financial services, this is a big risk. And how do we test that digital financial services are actually secure from this attack? So there are three things that are actually associated with the SIM swap. One, if you swap a SIM, then you're definitely going to you might put it in another device. So there's a component called the IMEI, which is the International Mobile Equipment Identifier, and this uniquely identifies each device. So every time you move a SIM from one device to another, then this identifier actually changes. So if the DFS provider is actually able to detect that the SIM has changed device, then that could be an indication of a SIM swap. And then the other bit is change of IMSI. So in most cases, when you do change a SIM card, then there's a number associated to it, which is called the International Mobile Subscriber Identity. And in the lab, what we're trying to do is test that if a SIM has been swapped, is the DFS provider able to detect that that IMSI has changed, or the number that actually defines that is embedded into the SIM card, has it changed? Then they're able to tell that, there's been a SIM swap on this card, so we can't freeze the wallet or do something like that. Then the other number is the SIM number, very similar to the IMEI, but the SIM number is, or the ICCID, Integrated Circuit Code Identifier, is a number that actually uniquely identifies each SIM worldwide. So every time a SIM is swapped, also it comes with a new ICCID. So sometimes it's transmitted over the air, sometimes it's not, but in all instances, when we're doing the SIM swap test, what we're trying to test is, are all these parameters or any one of these parameters being checked by the DFS provider before they actually allow a transaction to happen after a SIM swap, or every time a transaction is happening. So this is one test that we do in the lab. The other test we do is a SIM clone. I must say this is not something that's very common of recent. Why? Because most of the SIM cards are actually upgraded, but there are still some SIM cards that are using older versions of encryption. So there's several versions of encryption, but CompV1, which is one of the oldest, is actually very susceptible to SIM clones. So when we do receive that SIM card from the regulator or DFS provider, then we can give you an opinion on the security or the encryption algorithm that's used on that SIM card, and let you know whether it's susceptible to SIM clone or not. And then the next test that we do is binary over-the-air attack. I'll speak briefly about this. So normally, when a mobile network operator actually wants to upgrade your SIM card or the application menu on your SIM card, sometimes even just to change the SMS center number. These are just attributes that help your SIM card actually function well. Sometimes they can actually use a binary over-the-air message to make an update on the SIM card. And then attackers are also able to make use of this functionality to actually send a binary message, which can initiate a USSD transaction. It can initiate an SMS on your phone. It can initiate a phone call on your SIM. So it's a bit dangerous, but this is actually usually a fault on the SIM card. So there is certain values or certain security levels that have to be set on a SIM card so that it does not accept any binary message that it receives, or it doesn't action on any binary message that it receives. So what we do test in the lab is to make sure that your SIM card is not vulnerable to binary over-the-air attack, and that is to check that certain security levels have been done. And the way we do this test is we try pushing several binary messages to the SIM card and see how it actually responds to those binary messages. If we do find that certain TARs within the SIM cards are actually responding to that binary SMS, then we know it is susceptible to the binary over-the-air attacks. And these come into forms. One is SIMJacker and web attacks. And I think Simeon is an expert on this because the SIMJacker attack was actually published in 2018 or 2017, 2019, thereabouts, by the Adaptive Mobile Security. The next test that we do in the lab is remote UXSD execution. And this is ideally just to demonstrate that it is possible for a device, for instance, if you're using a rooted device, or if you're using a device that has Android debug bridge open, then it is possible for an attacker to actually push a USSD message to your device, or even start a mobile money service on your device. And what you see here what you see here is what we're trying to do is we attached one of the routed devices onto the internet through a Wi-Fi hotspot, and we're able to actually send a USSD message to that device without actually having access to the device or physical access to the device, because all this was pushed over the air. And as a bonus, I think I need to mention that this attack is also susceptible to because we did go out to the internet to see if there are actually devices that are susceptible to this attack. And we found a myriad of actually devices that actually have ADB open, and which means any attack around the world can actually push this USSD transaction to those devices and initiate a mobile money request. But on the other hand, we also found so many of what they call IoT devices, for instance, fridges or set boxes, Android TVs that also have the ADB port open. So in future, if you're using some of these to, let's say, pay for your Netflix, then beware that they could be susceptible to this kind of attack. And it means they won't be using them for remote USSD execution, but they could be able to, let's say, log keystrokes as you put in your passwords, pay for Netflix or whatever, things like that. So you need to be aware as you're using IoT devices. The fourth and last is the man in the middle attack. And here what we are trying to show is whether it's possible for an attacker to actually pick your PIN if they have access to the interface between the SIM card and the phone device. So there are a couple of things that are used in emerging economies or some of the economies out there. There's something called the thin SIM, which usually enables people to get access of two digital financial services providers using a single phone. And the issue with this is that some of the thin SIMs may be susceptible to this kind of attack. And what we mean is if that interface is compromised or with a thin SIM, it is possible that an attacker may remotely be able to access the PIN of your device. So in the lab, what we try to do is demonstrate for those, especially those that are using STK, that if we do have some devices in the lab that we can actually use to check if there is encryption as as messages are actually transacting between the mobile phone and the SIM card. In this particular example that I'm showing, we're able to actually find the PIN that was being used by this mobile device. And as you can see, it's 5453. But ideally in the lab, what we're trying to show to the regulator or DFS provider is that if you are using a thin SIM, then there are certain controls that need to be put in place. And even there are devices like Bladox SIMs, and also people using fake devices. You need to be aware that some of these come embedded with certain devices that can allow actually an attacker to be able to pick your PIN from the device. So later when you see money disappearing from your account, you may wonder, how did they get my PIN? But it's because you're either using a fake device, there could be a thin SIM, or even with a rooted device, this is also possible. So, and that as I come to a close, I'll mention some of the recommendations that we are giving for regulators and providers. One is for remote USSD execution on devices. We encourage you as the user, for those who are listening, even at an individual level, make sure that you've disabled ADB. You can actually go and do a small Google check on this, on how to disable ADB on your device if it's enabled. And then avoid using rooted devices and even fake devices, because these are susceptible to this kind of attacks. And then third, for regulators and telecom providers, is actually to do that kind of user education to make them aware not to just attach to any Wi-Fi network or things like that, because they could lose money if they do have wallets on their phones. And then for SIM exploitation using binary OTA, we do encourage the use of SMS filters or SS7 filters, things like that, and also blocking binary messages. And I think Eve also alluded to some of these as something they have. And then the other is SMS home routing. And this is to say that the telecom provider should actually bar all messages except those that are routed through the home network. So all messages should be routed to the home SMSC. Otherwise, nefarious attackers from out of work can actually send binary messages. And if they're not going through the home network, then obviously the purpose of the SMS filter is annulled. And then the other bit is SIM card security. Like I mentioned, this is a vulnerability on the SIM card, which means it's the security levels on the SIM card that have to be set right. So we do encourage that telecom providers and regulators make sure that, once there is a telecom that's actually providing digital financial services, then they do have the right security level set, usually at least 1 and above. Then for man-in-the-middle attacks, we do encourage secure radio channel communication. And this would mean getting rid of old cryptos like the A51 or ciphers like the A51, at least using A52 or A53 and above, because these are considerably much more secure than the A51. That is over the air, that is the interface between the base station and the mobile device. And then we encourage regulatory review where thin SIMs are used. And that is to say that the regulator can actually come in and say, we need to do a few tests before thin SIMs are used. There was a very interesting case, I think, between M-Pesa Kenya and another provider, especially on this aspect. I'm glad that was resolved. And then SS7 controls and mitigations, I think these were talked about ably, and I won't say much about them. Then session timeouts, we encourage, significantly, you need to set the session timeout so that it's long enough to allow the user to complete the transaction, but also short enough to make sure that, an attacker is not able to manipulate that session and or intercept the transaction and manipulate it. Then for SIM swap and SIM cloning, we encourage SIM and device change detection. I mentioned the 4 aspects of SIM card, the ICCIT, the IMEI, and the IMSI. So we do encourage that DFS providers, that is the banks, telecoms, and things like that, to be able to actually get this information every time a transaction is being made and comparing that with the previous values that were being used for the transaction to make sure that there hasn't been a SIM swap. And if a SIM swap has happened, then they should be able to detect and say, no, we can't proceed with this transaction until additional validation has been done. And then storage of SIM data, IMSI, and the secret key. Maybe I forgot to mention that when we're doing a SIM clone, it makes it easier if you do have access to the KI values. These are secret keys that are embedded or burnt onto the SIM card. So if I do have access to these values, then it makes it a little bit easier for me to actually do a SIM clone. So we encourage telecom providers to secure this information. And then last but not least is stronger authentication methods when SIM swapping. I'm glad Eve mentioned that they're using biometrics, which is considerably secure before a SIM swap happens. And as I close, I think I want to mention that we do have a couple of lab resources here at the ITU, and there've been a couple of reports that have been written in this aspect. So some of the aspects that I've mentioned today, that's the security testing for USSD and SDK-based transactions. There's actually a report on the ITU page. You can actually download this and see a little bit in detail how these tests are done, and then see in detail the recommendation measures. We also have a digital financial services security assurance framework, which DFS providers can actually grab and plug into their environment to be able to actually check whether they, because it actually identifies threats and vulnerabilities, and it also lists some of the recommendation measures that have to be done. We also have a security audit guideline, and this is mainly for regulators and telecom providers, if you like, or to actually go in and sort of like box tick. Have we done this? Have we done this? Have we done this? So this report is also available. And then last but not least, we also have the digital audit of various DFS applications. And like I mentioned, on the 24th of June, my colleague Vijay is going to be speaking more about these tests that we do for Android applications. So please watch out for that. And with that, I would like to conclude and say, if you're interested in these resources, please scan the QR code, or you can go directly to our webpage and download resources, and also get in touch with us if you actually want to, or if you're a regulator or DFS provider and want to have some of these tests done on your DFS application. With that, I hand it over back to you, LJ. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Arnold. And yes, I suspect that that QR code is perfectly safe to scan. Reassuring to hear there are ways to identify and combat so many creative attacks, and everyone has brought a brilliant collection of conversation points. So I would like to invite all our panelists to turn on their camera and sound, and we'll also be available to answer your questions. Please place your questions in the Q&A and not the chat area, because they'll get lost in the chat, and we would like to address as many as possible as they arrive. Hello there, all panelists. Thanks very much. So let's go to our first question. That's going to be for you, Simeon. You've had enough of a rest now. So we've noted that there's been a rise in SMS text scams and phishing attacks during the pandemic. Can you explain what has happened for such a huge rise to happen during the pandemic? I mean, obviously, many of us are now working from home, but what else is going on?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I would start by saying, frankly, attackers never let a good crisis go to waste, to badly paraphrase. I mean, when we get events like this, when people's working habits change, when there is something that is newsworthy or noteworthy, it becomes an opportunity for attackers to essentially jump on the back of that. I mean, I would say specifically, everyone has got new contacts as a result of this. You know, we're finally getting contacted by government organizations, by health services, by other institutions, and we're seeing a wave of attackers exploiting the fact that we are getting that new type of contact. We're also seeing a lot of social engineering, very nasty financial scams, leveraging some of the financial assistance and support packages that governments have put in place, offering to process people's application or pretending to actually be those organizations. So again, stealing personal information so they can hijack those identities. I would also say things are compounded by the fact that people are now working isolated. You know, it used to be if you got something that you weren't really sure of, you could ask friends or family or co-workers. But now we're all working and living, you know, in isolated environments. We've lost a lot of that immediate contact. And, you know, we're all using new remote systems, remote working, new web-based systems, and we're seeing attackers exploit those and, you know, major brands as well. You know, if it's got the right term in there, people are clicking on links. So it's unfortunately been almost a perfect storm of conditions that has allowed attackers to really fully exploit it.
Mm. It is such a strange sort of collection of events, and in some ways technology and its use has been massively accelerated by the pandemic, so it does make sense, I guess, that these attacks are going to be accelerating in their sophistication and frequency as well. Thank you. Eve, let's come to you next. I'd like to talk a little bit about the challenges that you have with regulation and security.
Thank you, LJ. I'll start with the regulation. DFS by nature removes geographical restrictions, plus there are numerous and diverse actors in that space. So this limits the legal, at the limit of the legal or policy reach of the regulators in the country boundaries. For example, a Nigerian or a Silicon Valley-based fintech can offer a financial service to a consumer in Uganda without requiring a license from the central bank or even a communication commission. The other challenge we have is the speed of technology change versus speed of changes in accompanying regulation. The regulator in our environment is sometimes late to catch up with the industry, and when they do, there's limited time for us to implement. And then there's also the size and diversity of players in the DFS market, because there are numerous actors, and this presents challenges of control for any regulator because they don't know who and to what extent to regulate them. And then there's also another challenge of the consumer protection. This can also be a challenge in environments like ours, of low financial literacy, poor connectivity, and transactional cybercrime. And yet DFS requires high level of flexibility to allow for growth of products and the spread of agents. And then for security specifically, we've discussed most of the key challenges in terms of the threats, and maybe if I could go over some of them again. Identity theft, authentication attacks, phishing attacks, etc. And like I said, DFS for us is a critical revenue line. So as MTN, we're investing heavily to ensure the platform is available and secure for our customers to transact. But also, we have embarked on use of better access controls. We're creating awareness and sensitizing campaigns out there for our customers. We're also doing agent training on best practices. We also do strict measures on reported fraudsters. And also we've started high value transaction monitoring. Thank you.
That's quite a large amount of responsibility, I think, placed on our consumers and people who use these devices. And I think that part of the issue is probably educating people. We have these incredibly sophisticated devices that we hold in our hands, and it's capable of so much. And yet it feels, even as someone who's tech savvy, that I'm undereducated on all of the vulnerabilities that are possible. I mean, obviously, when we get those scam texts, if you are even remotely sort of techno literate, you're going to be more able to work out to press, no, this is wrong. But even if you're kind of caught off guard, you might click something by mistake. So it's reassuring to hear that some regulators are working out ways to identify and combat it before it gets to us clumsy users. Arnold, I'd just like to bring you in on the measures that DFS regulators can implement to address the vulnerabilities in USSD and STK DFS applications.
Well, thank you, LJ. So I've already spoken a lot about this, but I think more critically is one is being able to actually identify those threats that occur in those USSD and STK environments that I've already alluded to. And then number two is actually trying to encourage the DFS providers or mobile financial services providers, and that will be in collaboration, because in most cases you find that most countries have a mobile network regulator and they do have a financial regulator. So the two need to work hand in hand to actually make sure that they are giving them controls that providers can actually go ahead and implement on both sides of the divide, because the financial transaction is actually happening through the mobile network operator, but it's actually being done by the DFS operator. So the two, the DFS regulator and the mobile network regulator, need to sit together and actually agree on some of these controls that we have actually already identified in some of the reports that we've shared on how they can actually collaborate together and also give a couple of controls that they could adopt in their environments to push in their countries.
It's a call for collaboration, isn't it? Which we are all about here. So I'm very happy to hear that sort of something that everybody is open to. Simeon, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about the SimJacker attack.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is quite a nasty one. Essentially, SimJacker is a way of sending a message in to the SIM card in your phone. So it's that little piece of plastic that people pop in their phone when they first go live and forget that it's in there. And the challenge here is it doesn't matter what your phone is. So you could be on a latest, greatest iPhone or Android or secure BlackBerry or whatever. This is an attack against the SIM card. So it's nothing to do with what the device is. And SimJacker is essentially talking to some of the applications that run on that SIM card. So again, people look at it and think, oh, well, it's just a little piece of plastic that's got an identity. I mean, as Arnold has shown us, there is so much that this actually acts as a gateway for. And in fact, there are a sophisticated set of tools and toolkits that actually run inside this. So some of the attacks actually enable people to gain things like not only intelligence about the device or the user, but even things like where is that user located? So, again, as mobile phone users, we look and say, well, GPS, I've got it turned off. Nobody knows where I am. But the phone network does. So by launching attacks in on things like SimJacker and the web browser, they're able to actually get it back from the SIM card itself. And if that doesn't work, they can try the signaling. If that doesn't work, they can try other techniques. So what we're seeing is there are so many different attack routes in to extract all this very sensitive information. People need to think it's a multi-layer security. It's not the device, the OS, just the SIM, just the network. It's all of those working together.
That's fascinating. Eve, I'd like to bring you in here because I'd like to ask you how to manage device security. How do you do it?
Thank you, LJ. Well, device security is about protecting the various devices and the networks they connect to from threats and vulnerabilities. Of course, there's some of the risks like unsafe applications, unsafe operating systems, maybe also losing your device, because once you lose your device, that means the fraudsters can access it, probably guess your PIN, or do fraudulent SIM swaps. So right now at MTN, we normally assist customers to track the stolen device in case they keep it active. Otherwise, we blacklist the device that is reported stolen. So that is really what we're doing for now. And then there's the eSIM, that is an upcoming technology in which the SIM is embedded to the device. This is still new, it's not even in our market yet, but we might have to think more in terms of device security once this comes into play. But like Simon, I think, mentioned, just for the comfort, the DFS wallets are really bound to SIM cards. And like I had discussed earlier, the security controls that we have in place around SIMs and the SIM swap process, for now, we can confirm them as safe until we keep innovating. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Arnold, I'm just going to ask a question following up on your IoT comments, because many of us have many IoT devices, lights, heating, alarms, baby monitors, home assistants like Alexa, and more companies are going to be building this into their devices. And with the rise of 5G, this becomes important for business, factory equipment, all of this. So what can we do to see, almost from a consumer perspective, but also, I guess, on a wider perspective, how can we test or protect or look up to see whether a device meets those standards?
So I think that's a very technical question in a way that
Sorry.
for somebody to actually be able to detect that your device is actually having some of those ports open, you need to be able to scan that. But I think it's more important for those that are actually providing those devices. For example, if you do have a baby monitor or things like that, and then it's provided through some operator or something like that. So it's good for you to actually go ahead and ask them, is ADB port open? What are the ports that are open on this? And is there security on those networks? I think that's what important. But if you're a user and you're technically savvy, then you can go ahead and actually try and do some nmap scanning on some of these applications that you do have in your home environment to see what ports are open, and then see which ones are relevant, which ones do have the security settings for them. And then those that are open without security settings, then you might need to block them manually. Sometimes it's not possible with these IoT devices, but I think it's more something to do with the manufacturers and those that are giving you those connections.
It's a fascinating area. I'm sure it's going to become more and more interesting for everybody on this panel. Well, thank you very much. I think we'll have a little bit of time to share some final thoughts from each of you on today's session. So anything you'd like to learn more about, anything you'd like to implement, anything that you dream of, anything that you would like help with, because our audience members are particularly interesting here. So you never know, they might be able to help. So I'm going to start with you, Simeon, if you have any closing thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I mean, I think, one of the key themes that all three of us have expressed here is that, mobile devices have gone from being something that's completely standalone, things that we just make calls and texted, to really showing how everything is becoming so interlinked and so pervasive. I mean, both Eve and Arnold have talked about regulation, and I think, absolutely critical that when we talk about this and the regulatory environments, that it is this interaction and involvement of financial regulators and telecoms regulators and understanding privacy regulation, that things are not prescriptive because hard boundaries create weaknesses and exploits. This is absolutely collaborative. Likewise, that operators and financial institutions and decentralized finance organizations are all working together to share experience, to share knowledge, to understand how to be able to mitigate the risks. I mean, it's increasingly going to be an environment where cooperation is the effective answer.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Eve, I'm going to just pop over to you for your thoughts on anything that you would like to change, and like your wish list almost, or things that you're doing next that you're excited about.
First, so thank you, LJ. Arnold spoke about some interesting innovations in the ITU lab, which I think he really needs to really quickly test with some of our telcos. So I hope we'll get to see more of that from you, Arnold, or ITU. But really for me, in Uganda specifically and East Africa, the growth of mobile money in general has been phenomenal and is expected to grow. And the success of DFS has been due to its inclusiveness. The ability to reach and tap into the rural population that are normally unbanked. So in Uganda, we have 80% of our population in the rural areas, of which about 50% have a mobile phone, which now is easier for them to access mobile money of the DFS services for their daily lives. So with such growth, that means innovation in the space continues to happen. So it's important to ensure that the platform is available and secure for transactions as we continue to grow the mobile money or DFS ecosystem. And then also is the COVID-19 has led to a new normal of working and learning from home for most of us. And this has laid bare the extent of digital and financial divide across the world. And as MTN, we are committed to bridging this divide, furthering digital and financial inclusion.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm just going to briefly see if I can answer this question from the audience about countries or DFS running passwordless technology as a level of authentication. Arnold, I think you're going to be able to answer this.
Oh yes, I think not particularly countries, but I would say there's so many applications now that are actually making use of passwordless authentication. So if you go and look out to the FIDO Alliance group, you'll actually find that there's so many of these big techs that are actually now getting involved into passwordless authentication. In fact, I think the Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Amazon, and the likes are also now integrating these into the hardware devices that they're actually producing. So you'll be able to use FIDO or biometric authentication for authentication, and password in the future may be normal.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thanks all of you for taking part, Eve, Arnold and Simeon. And as ever, audience, you've been brilliant too. Thank you ever so much for your kind attention and interaction. Talking of which, audience, we'd like your help at this point. We're going to display a short satisfaction poll, which we'd be ever so grateful for you to take part in. Just click on how satisfied you've been with the session. For example, if the panelists have mentioned something surprising, thought-provoking, even immediately useful, or have made you smile even for a second or so, we'd really appreciate you to click on there. And the session is recorded. If you'd like to watch any sections again, it's going to be available later on the FIGI website. And we've just only got a few more sessions available on this, the final FIGI. Next one's coming up on the 22nd, and there's another session on the 24th of June where we're discussing the security issues for applications on smartphones, and that's at 3 p.m. Central European time. So thank you all. Thank you once again, panelists and audience, obviously the technical team as well. We've really enjoyed having you with us, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, too.
Thanks.